apps can do a lot of cool things. You could order dinner, gamble on your favorite team, and track your health. You could even get a mortgage. One click and you can be approved. I'm not sure by who or what country they're in. You deserve more from the mortgage industry. At AnyMac Home Mortgage, we believe in the need for live human interaction during a very complex process. The kind of service and guidance which an app simply can't provide. Our customers are more than credit scores and income documents. They're individuals and families who live in and strengthen our communities. Their story is our story, and that story begins in a home. Chris Sawyer is an expert on providing superior customer service and in meeting the mortgage needs of current and future home buyers. With over 18 years of experience in the industry, Chris is able to help customers migrate through the home buying and home financing process by using his wealth of knowledge as a well-qualified mortgage professional. And best of all, Chris is located in Cromwell, Connecticut, where he has helped hundreds of clients in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island make their dreams of home ownership a reality. Visit chrissawyer.any-mac.com. Email him at csawyer@any-mac.com or give him a call, 860-878-8730.
Chris Sawyer, NMLS number 39345, corporate NMLS number 338923. AnyMac Home Mortgage is an equal housing lender. American Neighborhood Mortgage Acceptance Company, LLC. DBA AnyMac Home Mortgage. Lo-Fi Direct. Connecticut First Mortgage Correspondent. License Lender. Broker number ML 338923. Massachusetts Mortgage Lender and Mortgage Broker License number MC 338923. Rhode Island License Lender. License number 201128110L. Call for additional details.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is the Following Flames podcast, episode 4. I'm Robbie McCluskey, joined as always by the wonderful Joe Aguirre, the man at the helm of almost every episode. Joe, how you doing today?
Doing all right. It was a crazy, weirdo kind of weekend, but I enjoyed it.
Yep, crazy weekend indeed. We usually record on Fridays. Today we're actually recording following the weekend, just so everybody knows, this is following the weekend of the Roe v Wade overturned decision at the Supreme Court, which we will talk about. But the reason why we're not recording on the usual day is because I ran into an issue this past week where I, just for a little bit of background information, mentioned previously, I've got a disability and that affects mobility. It also affects a lot of like muscle tightness and stuff. So I got myself a massaging tool. If anyone's heard of the Right, it's like a psoas stretcher massager thing. Actually,
What is it supposed to do?
This is what it looks like. This isn't a Right. The reason why I got this one is because it was the Right is like $80. So I was essentially waiting for myself to find either like a cheap knockoff, which I'm not sure is even legal because I thought they had a patent or something, but I found one, so I bought it. And you're supposed to essentially like put your weight on it for it to either get rid of knots or stretch your psoas, which is an important muscle that starts around your lower back and stretches around to your kind of hip area and like with a lot of hip strength. So I did that. And an issue with my disability is that there is a severe lack of sensation for me in that area. So I'd never really understood when I was going too far with it. And I was like, oh, I don't really feel it. So let me just put more weight on it. And then the next day I was just like covered in bruises and just like some of the worst bruises you've ever seen. On top of that, I also have hemophilia, which is like a bleeding disorder. A lot of people might not know what it is. Essentially, the way I explain it is the clotting process in your body. Like if you get a cut, your blood clots and then it stops the bleeding. Hemophilia, essentially, to put it in ways that 5-year-olds will understand, if you picture a row of dominoes and each domino is a clotting factor. So when the dominoes start to fall, each one progresses to the next one, and that's the clotting process. So if you've got all your dominoes, then you can start the clotting process and it'll get to the end of it without a problem, like most people can. With hemophilia, essentially one of those, depending on the type of hemophilia you have, one of those dominoes isn't always present. So a lot of the time the clotting process can't complete. So, and I, a lot of the time, find that out far later than I should. In this case, I just like stretched it and I felt great immediately after. I was like, oh yeah, I feel loose. And the next day I woke up and like, oh yeah, I still feel loose, but look at all this bleeding that's going on.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so that was a little bit, it's something that I'm like completely familiar with. I actually, a lot of the time, don't address any like injuries or stuff that I have because I'm like, this one's not too bad. Whereas other people are like, I've never, like, it looks like you got hit by a car. And I'm like, yeah, but I've been hit by a car before. So it's like, it was just unconditionally painful. But like, now that everything's healed, like, obviously it was a painful weekend, but I still feel loose. So I guess it did technically do what it was supposed to do. But you know, it was almost like they left out a couple steps in between or a couple things that happened. So that's why we're off on a little on a weird schedule today. But I mean, I'd still recommend it. I feel loose, but you know,
If I was gonna complain about anything, last night, whilst playing in a wiffle ball game, I slid on some artificial turf, and I have pretty nasty burn on my left shin.
ooh.
Yeah.
And that's the wait, like so, like and that stuff's extra slippery too. Like if there's
Yeah.
any moisture on it, it's kind of like slip and slidey.
My bad I mean, I wore shorts, and the funny thing is that same shin just healed up from when I did it a few weeks ago for wiffle ball.
Yep. Well, it depending on who you play with, it can be full contact or just a regular soft sport. So anything can happen.
Yeah. See, I don't believe in soft sports. That's why I go balls to the walls.
Wiffle balls to the walls. Wiffle balls to the wiffle walls.
Yeah.
Man, if you get pegged by a wiffle ball, I remember like I used to play with my buddies in wiffle ball, and the strongest guy would always be pitching. And I mean, we were all buds, but every now and then he'd just whip you with the wiffle ball, and it's like getting smacked with like a wet noodle or something. It hurts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not end of the world pain, but it's like
the league I
inconvenient.
play in, there are multiple guys who throw over 70 miles an hour. One guy hits around 80. And as you can imagine, their aim is not always great. You definitely get hit a lot. And it does hurt in the moment. Again, not to sound like a bitch considering your weekend. But
well, I'm a medical nightmare all around, which is why I have no good relationships with any insurance company I've ever had. But yeah, you know, you don't have to say like, I can handle the pain or whatever, dude. Getting hit with wiffle balls hurts. It's a big sting.
thank you for saying that. My wife always laughs in my face when I'm like, oh, I got hit in the elbow.
Well, there's the difference. There's a huge difference between like an injury that hurts for a very long time, and then there's things like closing a car door on your thumb, which like it's that super excruciating pain for a very short amount of time. So everyone's like, tough it out. And then a minute later, you're like, fine. They're like, oh, I thought you were crying. But it's really just the wiffle balls, the sharp pains, bee stings, stuff like that. Obviously, like it's not going to change your life or send you to the hospital unless you're like allergic to bee stings. But like it's a sharp pain for a very little time. And your mind's not into it. You don't have that time to adjust, be like, okay, let me prep for this. No, that stuff hurts. And you are no less of a man for being in pain because of a wiffle ball injury.
No,
you might sound like less of a man based on the way that I just said it, but like it comes down to marketing it. You just got to say, oh man, this was one of the biggest, most dense, heaviest wiffle balls you'll ever see, man. and it came at me like a speeding train in Japan, you know, like nothing holding it back, just floating through the air, right on my bare skin. Then it sounds more intense. But if you're
That's
like, yeah,
manly right there. Yeah, it is.
if you're like SpongeBob going to the hospital and they're like, I ran inside and slipped on an ice cube and got covered in boo-boos, then yeah, you belong at Weenie Hut General.
Yeah.
Um,
General, I forgot about that.
But yeah,
about
so
that. I like SpongeBob. Thank you for the SpongeBob reference.
I'm chock full of SpongeBob references. That was my childhood. SpongeBob is one of those. SpongeBob, I think, is the closest thing to a modern day, like Warner Brothers cartoon, because obviously those didn't age as well. But every kid is going to know who Bugs Bunny is. Every kid is going to know who like Daffy Duck. Maybe not so much Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, but all those famous cartoons. SpongeBob's right up there now. And it's a more modern one. And they're still I'm pretty sure they're still making new episodes, even though anything after season 3 wasn't really worth watching.
I always hated when they would like zoom in on SpongeBob's face.
And get like the hyper detail.
So weird. You know,
yep.
Ruin it for me. Also, there was when he took his driving test. I don't know if you remember this episode, and I'm only to tell this because it was the first time where I was like, "Oh, SpongeBob." You remember the episode where he's gonna get his driver's license, and him and the teacher are driving around, and it doesn't go well.
There's like 4 episodes. Is this the one where he flies off of the edge of the cliff into a juice truck? Or is this like the original one, which I believe was just called Boating School?
Boating School, there we go.
Yeah, I believe, where he just kept crashing into the lighthouse and Mrs. Puff kept yelling, SpongeBob, why?
Oh my God, yes, that's exactly the episode. You brought me right back there. But at the end, he fails, and then he tells her he's signing up again, and they're going to have to go through all that disaster again. And he says to her, Mrs. Puff, I'll see you next Tuesday.
Yep.
I mean, why was there a long weekend? Right? I'll see you Monday, teacher. No. We must have been Labor Day. See you next Tuesday, he said. And I was like, oh. I'm glad my kids don't understand what that means.
Well, back in the 90s, wasn't there like not an actual structured challenge, but a lot of cartoonists aimed to see how many adult references they could get away throwing in. I mean, Rocko's Modern Life, if you remember that, was notorious for that. Like there was an episode where he has to get a different job or something, and it cuts to him out a view outside of his home, and you just hear, oh baby, oh baby, oh baby, right there. And then it cuts in and he's just on the phone, and that's pretty much like the end of the scene. But they subtly imply that he's like a phone sex worker, and he ends up being on the phone with his neighbor.
So listen, I like cartoons. Cartoons for kids should be cartoons for kids. And when you're talking about cartoons for adolescents, you know, or teenagers or adults, that's something else. I again, just the first time I heard that on SpongeBob, it threw me because I thought my kids were watching a kid's cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
I was also then aware I should pay attention because there's jokes for me here.
Yeah, that's what makes a lot of good cartoons timeless, that they can be for kids very clearly, but they also have adult references that parents aren't, or like kids aren't going to understand until they're a lot older, but parents will understand. They'll be like, haha, I know this might not be a good thing to have in a kid show, but they did it smart. And no kid is going to understand what see you next Tuesday refers to. Or like also in Rocko's Modern Life, when they go to an amusement, like a construction themed amusement park, you can ride the jackhammers, and the sign that just says jack all you want. Some of them were obviously more on the nose than others, but like the Lego movies got a lot of adult references. which is I also just love the Lego Movie for the subtle humor in general. But a lot of good movies are ones that you can go to a theater with as an adult with kids, and your kids will love it, but you'll also be actually very interested in it. Actually, on that topic, that brings me to one thing that before we talk about something else, that when I was that reminded me of a date I went on to the movie theaters, to the movies with a girlfriend I had at one point, and we went to see How to Train Your Dragon, and like in the middle of the movie, we're in the back, back or the theater. It's probably in like the second month of its showing, so not a lot of people there, but like we're canoodling, no one else is in a row. We're just there to essentially like find like a dark, cold or dark quiet place to make out. And she's like trying to kiss me and everything, but I'm like, man, I'm really into this kids movie actually. Like this is a good story. So she's like kissing me, but my eyes are like on the movie. I'm like, okay, I don't want to miss this part, but I like this is my girlfriend, so I got to make sure everything's going well. And like I'm not ignoring her, but man, I really want to know what happens to Toothless the dinosaur, Toothless the dragon here. And I'm like kissing her like while I'm like watching this kids movie. I'm like, oh man, this is really awesome. And then I'm like, at what you've got to be very careful with the movies that you select, because if you're going there just as like a teenage hookup and then you get really interested in the movie, I'm just like, sorry, like I get we're in a relationship and you want to like make out and stuff, but look, I'm really enjoying what DreamWorks is putting in front of me. So can you just hold off for another 45 minutes there, m'lady?
How'd that go over? I wouldn't think well.
Oh no, she didn't notice. I was very subtly playing both sides of the room. I was like, okay, watching it, and she was just like, she wasn't watching, but like I never got caught. I was just like, pretty much I came out of that movie learning one thing, and it was I have to select better movies to not get attached to when I'm trying to spend time with someone. Because I get
Yeah.
really sucked into movies. I'm a big movie buff, so maybe it's just a dark path to go down for me in general. Be like, oh man, I really want to see how this plays out. I really want to see how this Nicolas Cage movie is going to play out. So might be less common, but I get sucked into movies a lot. So even terrible movies. But that's just my personal experience. Make sure you're going to see a very crappy, obviously terrible movie if it's on a date, because then you can focus on each other more, especially if like no one else is in the theater. But don't go to see something that's going to end up being the inspiration for like 5 sequels, because
Yeah.
then you're kind of screwed if you're like, now you've either got to pay to see the movie again if you actually went there just to hang with your girlfriend or whatever, or your significant other. And then it just doesn't work. Make sure you're going to like, yeah, very crappy discount Nicolas Cage movie. Any Disney Star Wars movie, you can probably be guaranteed that that's not going to be all that great. But
Anything that you can buy on the sidewalk in New York City in a 5 for 15 deal is the kind of movie you're talking about.
Any movie that started out that was originally intended to be straight to DVD or like a TV movie, and then the production company was like, let's put it in theaters. Those are the kind of movies you want to go to, because know those are going to be bad. Like when they decide to put a Lifetime movie in theaters for some reason, go to those. Anything else, probably not a good idea, especially because if it's a good movie or well produced or just sequel worthy, you're either going to miss out on the date or you're going to miss out on the movie, and either way I don't want to do either of those. So choose wisely, or just don't be addicted to movies like I am. Don't be one of those people that gets sucked into a screen wherever you're at. But yeah, that maybe that's just something I need to grow into. I need to learn a little bit more about. You ever run into that? I mean, maybe not at a movie, but you ever like be on a date with someone and then you're like, oh man, something else seems really more interesting than what I'm doing right now.
Sure. And I mean, as a married person, that's the battle of my life, is to constantly have to pay attention to things when I'm doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Saturday night, I was watching UFC. And my wife came in And like the main event was starting. And she's like, "What are you watching? Can you turn that off?"
Are
It's
are you streaming this sub legally,
no,
or
no.
are you actually doing the pay-per-view?
It was not so it wasn't a pay-per-view, but I paid for ESPN whatever
Oh, okay, so it
plus.
is a part of like a service that you okay.
It's part of a service, yeah. So yeah, I pay like $8 a month for that, and Hulu and Disney or whatever the bundle is. So it all works out, right? But again, she just assumes when she walks into the room that what I'm doing is over. You know, I play a football game on my phone sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The game takes like the whole game 5 minutes. That's it. And I'll be in the middle of the game and she'll come walking over to me and be like, "You're gonna keep playing that?" It'll be done in like 2.5 minutes. As if nothing I'm doing has any importance to whatever is about to happen. You understand
Or
what I'm
that
saying?
everything has a pause button.
Right.
That
Right.
was the most irritating kind of fight that I could never win as a kid with my parents, like trying to finish up a video game. They're like 5 more minutes, and I'm like, okay, I'll try to finish this extremely hard level in 5 minutes, and I can't pause it or save it, or else I'm going to lose a lot of progress. And then that 5 minutes comes up, and I'm just like, look, mom, I can't pause pissing halfway through. This is a very similar situation to me taking a piss. Like, I'll be done pretty soon, but
Would you agree that the number one most irritating thing on this planet is when you're doing something, probably something that you value or cherish or just really enjoy doing, and somebody with zero regard, and again, this could be a parent, a spouse, a significant other, it could be anybody, it could be a friend or a neighbor. You're in the middle of something, and they're like, "Drop it, and you're like, "No." Like, that never, ever gets a good reaction, ever. To
yeah.
insist to somebody to, like, "All right, wrap that up." You're like, "I've been doing this for 4 hours. Wrap this up? What?" I don't understand, like, that's one of those things where, like, that will make me angry.
Yeah, unless it's like something that um I would have expected or was already on my schedule, at which point I would say, okay, I'm going overtime on this. But if I'm doing something, especially for like 4 hours, and then if I'm doing something at all for 4 hours, that's essentially what my day has become. So anything else that's like, okay, let's or drop it, switch it up. Now you're also trying to redo my day. And I'm like, no, this is my day right now. If this wasn't planned, then like I understand, but like, no, this is my day. This is what I'm doing. And the only reason like I empathize with that wholly because this entire past week I was cleaning my car. It was an absolute mess. The reason for that was I drove by a pristine 1993 Acura Integra, like powder blue manual stick. I was driving home and I saw it and I was like, oh man, maybe I could just trade in my car right now for that. And then I looked around and I was like, nope, they wouldn't even touch this with a 10-foot pole. So I ended up going back and like for most of the week, like compressed air, like 10 different cleaning chemicals, toothbrush in between all the cracks. Like I unbolted my freaking car seats just to vacuum underneath them. I found like 7 lighters that hadn't been used up. It was great.
Oh,
Um,
good for you.
but anyone just like middle of the day, if anyone came to me, it's like, hey, I need you to do something. It's like, no, can't you see I'm trying to afford a 93 Acura right now when I'm just scrubbing down my Prius? Um,
Oh, man.
but that's okay. On that topic, that was a motivation for me to keep my car clean regularly because I personally have a really big problem with like getting motivated. If I can tackle something when I'm motivated to do it, it's almost like my efficiency and effectiveness goes up so much. But I was thinking about this yesterday when I finished up cleaning my car. Actually, I'm still working on my floor mats. Um, but I was cleaning it up and I was like, man, I've wanted to clean my car for the past like 2 months. And the only reason I ended up doing it was because I passed a car that I would have impulsively traded this car in for, and it was too dirty for me to do that. So I was like, okay, now I'm going to have my car clean all the time. I'm going to keep it nice because I never know when I'm going to see a car on the side of the road and be like, I've got this asset right here that I could trade for that asset. And it's clean. So they'll be like, oh, this guy takes good care of his car, that kind of thing. But another situation where I ran into something similar as far as like getting motivated was growing up. I was never really good about like taking care of my teeth. Well, I mean, like, I brush my teeth, but my parents would always like remind me. And then a couple of years ago, maybe a year or two, or yeah, a couple of years ago, Steve-O from Jackass posted a video on his YouTube channel talking about how he didn't take care of his teeth, and how like if you've seen Steve-O's mouth work, he's essentially had like all of every single one of his teeth filed down and veneered. So his teeth look good now, but he's always had really crappy teeth, or just problems with his teeth, probably because of drug use and everything. But he's also he was like, yeah, I never really flossed, so I always had really like bad teeth in between my teeth, and everyone would like comment on how bad my breath smells. And literally, like, it must have been like 20, I must have been 25 at the time. 25 years of my life went by, and no doctor or parent or dentist was ever able to get me to floss. But a 7-minute video posted by Steve-O from Jackass got me to be one of the biggest like dental hygiene advocates in my life. And I floss now, and it's just like finding the right timing and seeing the right thing to motivate me. And then it's pretty much a switch in my brain to be like, okay, now I'm going to clean my car as much as I possibly can, or not overboard, but like keep it clean, tidy, just handle things properly. Same with my teeth. Like, I'm very good with my dental hygiene now. And it all came after just years of nothing working on me. And then I was just in the right mindset and got hit by like a video or the opportunity to potentially trade in my car. And I'm like, you know what? Now I see what's deterring me from doing something. That's the motivation. And a lot of the time it ends up just being like, it ends up being me wanting to get something or needing money for something. And then I'm like, there's the motivation. But I don't know
I rarely floss. I floss if there's something stuck in my teeth. And then when I go for my 6-month checkups with my dentist, 2 weeks out every day, I go to town flossing. And those people are convinced I floss all the time. It's a scam, is what I'm telling people. You know?
What, flossing, or you saying that you floss?
Well, I'm lying because I don't. I mostly don't floss. I really do. Like 2 weeks before my appointment, I really just go to town, and they can't seem to tell the difference.
Well, I would think they're not really the ones trying to tell the difference. I would assume floss. Well, I get a lot of good stuff out of my teeth when I floss, so I do it a little bit more often nowadays. But I also have those, like, not the like floss that you friggin' strangle your fingertips with. Just those little like flosser things that are going to kill the environment because they're like 30 times more plastic for.
Oh yeah, the plastic
like
thing with the little
a little
on the
inch
end,
of
right?
floss on it. Yeah. And those make it a little bit easier and just shred my gums. And then my gums are actually like stronger now, so they don't bleed like crazy anymore. But yeah.
Meanwhile, there's a dolphin swimming around and it's like stuck in his eye.
Well, it's not my fault the dolphin doesn't know how to floss.
He's trying. He's trying. Dolphins are smart.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know dolphins are smart, but
they don't know how to floss, though.
Do they have to floss?
They have teeth.
Yeah. But then again, they're not like, I mean, the main reason a lot of humans have to take more care of their teeth is because of the sugar in their diets, because we eat a lot more sugar than everything else on Earth. Like sugar is pretty much the main problem with like
Uh,
dental issues.
dude, pretty much it's like drugs or soda that is going to rot your teeth out of your mouth.
Yeah. And I try to avoid soda.
Nice.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm also not doing meth, so my teeth tend to stay a little bit better than others.
Yeah, stay off the meth if you want your teeth to be, all right.
Yeah, that's usually what my dentist says. He stopped saying floss, he just said stop meth.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if you went to a dentist, they didn't ask if you floss, but they were like, "Are you smoking meth? Are you on crystal? All right, you probably don't want to do that." Also, there's this thing called flossing. We don't have to talk about it, but you might want to look into it. But yeah, cut out the meth. But yeah, little things like that always got me able to make positive changes in my life, which I guess is not so uncommon because a lot of the time we have information readily available to us and being like, oh, we know that's bad for us, but I mean, we're not going to really care about it right now. A lot of people are selective with stuff like that, either medically or just health wise, or just when it comes to religious things, people can be pretty selective. It's a lot of the time like what I want to focus on now. I could be considered a hypocrite based on what I select and what I don't select, but anyway, I got off on a little tangent there. I wanted to talk about also when I went to get that car. Remember, this was a 1993 Acura Integra. Just kind of a regular model, and 93 Acura Integra, pretty much just picture an early 90s Honda, little tin can. This one was also one owner, 75,000 miles on it. So Acura Integra, pretty much a Honda Civic from the early 90s. Can you take a guess at what the price for this was listed as when I went to check it out?
17,000.
That's actually not far off. It was they had it at 14.5 for a 93 Integra. And just because I was like, okay, I know used car prices are absolutely absurd right now. I went online just to at least compare it with the Kelley Blue Book value. And I know Kelley Blue Book's only just looking at model number. They don't really look at context of historical importance now, or they rarely weigh in car enthusiast values on stuff like that. An excellent condition 93 Integra, exact same model, all the same options, had a high point price estimate on Kelley Blue Book of $4,000.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's honestly what I was kind of thinking the price would be around. Not like that's what I was closer to when I saw it. I was closer to assuming that it was closer to 4,000 than it would be 14.5. And I even got in touch with people and they're like, yeah, the used car market's crazy, but honestly, that's not a sports car really. It's not like a historic model. It's not even the top of the line engine from that point. It's just clean. It's just a clean early 90s Acura Integra.
That's not a lot of miles. 75,000 miles.
75,000 honestly. So the thing that it did have going for it, it looked as if it had it looked very much like it had almost come off the line not too long ago. It was so pristine. But I even found like similar mileage vehicles from next generations with the Sportline models, better engines for similar pricing. So I think it was just them taking advantage of the market, being like, hey, nobody knows what a used car is supposed to be priced at right now, so we're just going to put this up at 14.5, which is absolutely absurd in my mind. I'm still thinking about it. I might try talking them down, but we'll see how far that can go. But yeah, stuff like that is insane because it's such a cheap little tin can of a car. And I think they're pricing it that way just because it was completely unmolested, so no like aftermarket parts or anything, one owner. And this is probably a kind of car which would eventually just get torn apart and made into a race car or something. But I wouldn't make that assumption as a dealer. I'd be like, okay, if somebody says this, then we can be like, oh, well, this is the price, and we're pretty firm on that. But if someone's just seeing this as a car, they're going to be like, why is this 93 hatchback the same price as like a used BMW with a little bit more mileage from like 2007, you know?
Yeah. Listen, bottom line is, if you're a car person and that's the car you want, you would pay $14,500 for that.
Yeah, but I am a car person, and this is a car that like, so I have got a file on my computer of it is a folder of 613 different cars that I would like to own at some point in my life. I'm willing to bet 600 of those are unattainable, but 613, that accurate is not on there because it is not really significant at all. I just saw it and I was like, oh, cool. It looks really clean. And then I saw the price and I was like, oh, it was priced as if it was like a special edition of something. It just didn't make sense to me, which is what was irritating because I know the used car market is absolutely crazy right now, but that was beyond absurd to me. That was just price gouging at that point. But yeah, that rustled my jimmies as a car guy. But if you're not a car guy, you're probably not even looking at that car person, car anything.
I am not a car enthusiast at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a car enthusiast, and my current vehicle is a Prius, so it's funny. It's a bit of a shame.
One of my arch rivals when I was in high school was a car guy, and so by nature, I had to be like, cars are stupid, and I'm not interested.
That's one of the toughest things when somebody with a shared interest ruins an entire kind of culture for someone because they set a bad example or were just a dick to you when you were younger.
Yeah, I mean, right. And seriously, in my case, my thought was, if being a car guy is being this much of a douchebag, I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the cars. Cars aren't douchebags. People are douchebags.
People are douchebags. People that are trying to control people are douchebags.
Well, since we're talking about people trying to control people, shall we address the elephant in the room? And I'm not talking about yo mama.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Oh,
sorry, I missed the early 2000s.
That's hilarious. My mom actually just lost a lot of weight, so she's feeling pretty good.
For her.
Yeah,
good for her.
A lot of weight.
Real shout out. Never talk bad about someone exercising or trying to lose weight. Just want to put that out there. People that take videos of other people people at the gyms, maybe even doing something wrong. They are just trying to be a healthier person, and they could use some help, maybe. So
seriously, you ever been to a gym though? I used to go to this gym, dude, where this guy, we used to call him the Spider-Man. He used to like climb on top of the equipment, and swing off things, and it's like, yeah, everybody sees you.
Mm-hmm.
No, get on the treadmill and burn some calories, you loser. You're not
trying to activate the muscle between my third and fourth pec.
You're like, dude, you're not here to enter, right? This isn't like your TV show at the gym. Cut it out. Just use the equipment like it's meant to be used.
Yeah. A lot of people that are trying to get the most minute muscles probably shouldn't be at like a Planet Fitness or something. No offense. No gatekeeping, but like you might get that lunk alarm going. But yeah, let's jump into let's not get on a tangent anymore. Let's go right into the main topic of conversation, which honestly, us having to reschedule our recording was probably a great thing just so we could have some time to do a little bit more research on this event. Obviously, we're talking about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which opens the door to state by state regulation regarding abortion access, how abortions are going to be handled or provided, or if even available. A lot of states have trigger laws or trigger bans, which are probably going to go into effect relatively shortly, that reduce access to abortions, reduce a lot of privacy for people that want to get abortions. And it's for us, obviously, two men in America. We can't empathize with this particular issue as well as we would like to fully understand the conversation, but sympathy never been higher. I think this is a severe step backward for women's reproductive rights, just reproductive rights in general. I think it was a completely unnecessary move given the amount of things that we're dealing with currently as a nation. But what's your take on it? How's your weekend gone over, and what you've come across since this all went down, Joe?
So I literally went and read Roe v. Wade, the original decision, and here's a couple things that I don't think people know, and some things where I feel like the conservative justices were a little less than honest on. Generally speaking, abortion has always been socially acceptable, going back to the Greeks and the Romans, which this court in 1973 literally went that far back to try to figure out, how do we handle this? What is the law? How's it generally been viewed? Because again, with law, you're supposed to follow precedent. They say that it's not steeped in American tradition, but that's incorrect. It always has been. And even when Connecticut was the first state to put in abortion laws in 1821, it wasn't to arrest women or criminalize it. It was to gain information on abortionists. So it wasn't until the 1950s where states started criminalizing abortion. And in 1973, you had Roe v. Wade. So the restrictive abortion laws criminalizing it actually enjoyed a much shorter rule of law in this country than has the current law, which, and I think this is important too, they ruled during the first trimester the government could not regulate abortion at all other than require a licensed physician to do it. As you get into the second trimester, and especially now where technology is, you're actually forcing a woman to be at a greater risk. Each trimester, your chance of fatality goes up. It is so much safer at this point that, I mean, you can get an abortion on your lunch break. Okay? Most of the time it's a pill. And again, people don't understand how sex and science and all this stuff works. A lot of pregnancies get washed out. They don't end up sticking to the uterine wall and they get flushed out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It wasn't until, again, they didn't have the technology back in the day, but until the baby was moving inside the mother before they considered it a person. I'll go a step further here. Jews don't believe that a fetus is a baby. As they say, you're not born until you take your first breath, and you die when you take your last. Mm-hmm. That's what life is. This is this idea of a fetus or conception or whatever. That's a Christian doctrine that has obviously no source in the Bible, or the Jewish people would have the same belief, since one led to the other. The other thing is, because abortion's safer than birth, any state would need a vested interest in why they're trying to decide for you. And you could make the argument, and it had been made, again, there's laws that criminalize suicide. The state has a vested interest to keep you safe from harming yourself. And when women were using coat hangers to abort their own babies or friends or however that was happening, they were putting their lives and the fetus's life at risk. So the state had an interest in regulating that. That is no longer the case. I think this had been a liberal court, they would have rejected that on the grounds that there was no grounds, that the state, and this also comes up greatly in Roe v. Wade, the idea that, are you trying to regulate sex, or are you really concerned about the life of the mother? That comes up over and over again. Now, there's all this talk about right to privacy and that there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. There is the right to liberty, though, and that's exactly what the 14th Amendment is. A lot of the right to privacy in the case of abortion actually was derived from, again, if you read the decision, the idea that a doctor and a patient have privacy, a privacy clause between them. And that only, again, based on your right to liberty in this country. I know some people don't like the due process clause or this idea that it created a right to privacy. Here's what kills me, though, Robbie. The right to privacy, whether it's founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action as we feel it is, or in the Ninth Amendment's reservation of rights to people, is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether to terminate her pregnancy. The Ninth Amendment, basically, if there's not something in the Constitution saying the government can do it, then the people have the right to do it. And since abortion isn't mentioned in the Constitution in a restrictive fashion, then the people have the right to do it. Okay. And last thought, 90% of abortions happen inside 20 weeks. And there's no such thing as a late-term abortion. You can't just electively go in your 40th week and be like, I don't want this baby anymore. No doctor would do that. There's also no such thing as a partial or post-birth abortion. They don't deliver babies and then kill them. That's actually murder. That would be a murder. So some of these things that I hear people saying and arguing, there's just no valid grounds. The court also said there's no indication that the Constitution's use of the word person was meant to include fetuses, and thus rejected Texas's argument that a fetus should be considered a person with a right to constitutional life. Last thought, Robbie. The Supreme Court is final decision in this country on court cases. The idea that this court went back and overturned another court's final decision is not how the Supreme Court works.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, more on the topic of SCOTUS reform, because, well, one thing that with this particular ruling, one thing that stood out to me was what got us to this point. And a big aspect of that was 3 judges that are now on the Supreme Court were appointed during the Trump era, a single term presidency that a lot of people don't share political opinions with. So I'm just, the fact that we've got 9 Supreme Court judges, right?
Yep.
A third of those have been appointed during one presidential term, not even like an 8-year term, a 4-year term. And I don't know what the future holds as far as a Trump presidency, a Trump re-election or whatever, but it just, and this goes for both sides. I wouldn't want either side to be able to have the ability to, or just have the random luck, as it would seem, that 3 Supreme Court justices have to be determined, unelected Supreme Court justices with life lifetime positions there during a 4-year period. That just monumentally shifts the entire course of the Supreme Court for a long time, especially if they're going to put in younger judges like Justice Barrett, who and a lot of these also in their confirmation hearings said they weren't going to touch Roe v. Wade. So there's issues with accountability, lying in the process in the hearings, which I don't know if the legality of perjury in those circumstances. I would also like to see Supreme Court term limitations. Also, just to make it balanced in a presidency, like a limit to the amount of judges that can be appointed to the Supreme Court if term limits aren't going to be put in place. Just because that's, I mean, a lot of like we hadn't seen it before, but like 3 in a course of 4 years is it just seems like a huge flaw. And when I was listening to Fox News, not willingly, but I overheard it. They were saying one of the people that they had as a guest was someone who had been an anti-abortion advocate for decades at this point, and he was talking about how at the point where he realized that he had to make it a strategy about the people in the court's position as opposed to like a public perception strategy. So when it turns to an issue that's almost like strategically like weaseling its way into place as opposed to like protesting, getting your opinion heard, and then actually having it like the waves lead to the impact that has had, it just seems like a complete downfall of any kind of checks and balances that we have now that there's this like this force of people in the Supreme Court, all essentially chosen by how I view them, a pretty cultish party, which doesn't represent the majority of the country. I think that's a severe an area that's in need of severe reform. Just to, I mean, this is
Right.
this is a loophole that we now see that's been exploited, and in any way, the government moves so darn slowly that I'm very low on my hope as far as this being addressed anytime soon. Obviously, if anything does happen, like right wing media is going to be painting it as like a tyrannical effort to change the way our country runs. It's I don't know. It's something that has happened so quickly based on almost like a loophole being exploited that I'm amazed that the outrage is. I mean, the outrage obviously right now is for women's rights and reproductive rights, but it's also a huge area of concern where this isn't the only issue that could be addressed or impacted by something like this, based on people just loading the courts during one presidential term with people that don't represent how most of Americans feel.
72% of Americans support keeping Roe v. Wade as was.
Oh, with Roe v.
So
Wade in place, it's like okay, if it's in place, people are able to make their own decisions. But now I just keep thinking like, oh, what about this? What about this issue? This kind of doesn't fall in line with the way you're talking about it. Even when you were saying the Jewish religion believes life begins at first breath. I personally would more so argue that if you want to pinpoint a spot, regardless of religious beliefs, if you want to pinpoint a spot where life begins, I would think it would begin when a baby is no longer dependent on a mother to survive.
Viability.
And viability. And the NHS, the National Health Service, or system. I was looking at particularly the UK NHS talking about baby at 24 weeks, saying that by the time you're 24 weeks pregnant, the baby has a chance of survival if they are born. Most babies born before this cannot live because their lungs and other vital organs are not developed enough. So if you say that a baby is born at or that life begins at conception, then I'm just thinking without the mother, it's not a life. Like if a mother dies, the baby is going to die almost always before 24 weeks. Severe medical intervention, 22 seems to be doable now, I guess, but with high chance of birth defects, death as well, but also mental issues coming from that. But you introduce so many issues that didn't exist before that people are going to argue about, that there's going to be a lot more legal cases regarding, simply because the government gets involved. So in this case, this is an issue that I'm very libertarian on. I'm like, people should be able to make their own decisions about themselves. And when I hear people that have been advocating, anti-abortion advocates for decades, like a lot of them were religious personalities, praying, being like all the babies that we've saved. But no offense to them, they're not your lives to save. If you're determining, or if your entire life has been dedicated to pushing your beliefs on other people and affecting the way they live their own lives, then that gets on my nerves to an extreme extent. And I just think by taking a stance on this, outside of being like, hey, you have the freedom to do what you want, by taking a stance on this, a government stance, it's going to open a lot of areas where people are going to be arguing religious freedoms. I know the Temple of Satan, and just so people know, the Temple of Satan is mainly just people using religion to counter argue a lot of religion led political regulation and government moves to kind of show the hypocrisy in a lot of things. It's not people actually worshiping Satan. It's just
right. Yeah. Again, you have places where they have, where Christians always give the morning prayer or whatever, and then groups sue.
And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
But
honestly,
so listen, like groups would sue, and then so like they would bring like a Muslim group in or Jewish group in every now and again to do it, and then right again, once it became this idea that the Satanists were in town. Suddenly they were like, we'll just not do these services anymore. Forget it. Because they didn't want to give the Satanists the opportunity. Again, not knowing, as you said, Robbie, that these people don't really worship Satan. They're just mocking the idea of religion. And again, here's the problem with the religion. And with this case in particular, this comes down to 5 justices' personal religious beliefs trumping the Constitution is what they've done. And trumping the reason I say the Constitution is because the Supreme Court is the final decision on something.
Mm-hmm.
That's how this works. That's why they were asked about following precedent and respect for law. That's the whole process. Their personal religious belief outweighed that of 72% of Americans.
And
there's
it completely shat on the First Amendment, the very first sentence of it specifically says Congress, but Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
The people
make
that
no law
about
respecting an establishment of religion. And when you said earlier, related to the 50s, what was the in the 1950s, what you were talking about?
That's where they started criminalizing abortion.
Criminalizing abortion. I was going to say, in addition to that, the 50s is where a lot of separation from church and state really started to crumble. The 50s was also the time period when under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance, and "In God We Trust" was coined as the country's motto by Eisenhower. Both of those were done by Eisenhower. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because
again,
the pledge.
ignorantly, because they thought that the Russians, the Soviets, were atheists. So they really
Okay, so
wanted
that
to
was
clamp
a
down
that was a
on the
part of
God
it.
thing. Yeah.
So just so people have a little understanding of the Pledge of Allegiance, original author, as far as what most people know, there's a little bit of debate as far as the official author, but from everything we know, Francis Bellamy is credited as the author of the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm willing to bet that they don't say very frequently that even though he was an ordained minister, he didn't have under God in there. And he was also a socialist. So I'm not taking sides, but you don't hear a lot about those two things. But Reverend George Doherty, Docherty, I'm going to assume Doherty, big advocate during the civil rights movement, but he was also the main figure in getting under God added into the pledge. And he was quoted as saying, "To omit the words under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is to omit the definitive factor in the American way of life." He discounted the right of atheists to object, arguing that an atheist American is a contradiction in terms, because if you deny the Christian ethic, you fall short of the American ideal of life. And for that to be impactful enough for Eisenhower to add it into the Pledge of Allegiance is a complete slap in the face to all the people that are always preaching, what would the founding fathers wanted put in the Second Amendment. They wanted us to have guns. Like, okay, the founding fathers also had separation of church and state as a key aspect of the founding principles of this country. And once again, we're selectively picking and choosing what we want to value, especially in the Supreme Court. Now, I know people are annoyed by also the ruling related to a New York gun law, because they're saying now everyone has the right to concealed carry. That was actually more related to an issue where only like the elite or people that knew politicians or had a lot of money and were celebrities could get certain gun permits. So there's more to that one. But in this instance, whenever people say it's not a religious issue, I'm like, what kind of issue is Roe v. Wade if you're outlawing or you're allowing people to outlaw abortion? What is that going to be based off of?
So they're going to make this states' rights argument, which, in the case of the New York gun state, the New York concealed carry law, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot make their own laws on concealed carry. And then the next day, when it came to carrying a baby, they decided the state should have the right to decide that. I mean, hypocrisy at its finest, again, proving that Republicans and conservatives value guns more than they value women.
I would take it even further. The far right conservatives value almost material possession or inanimate objects more. I mean, even corporations more than they do an actual individual human. I mean, they can say we're fighting this because we want a baby to be given the opportunity to live a life. Do you think they'd be doing the same thing if every avoided abortion turned out to be an AOC?
You know, funny you should say that. I spit out some stats on Friday about this. And generally speaking, first of all, you got to understand, most kids in the foster care system, there's 400,000 of them now. Most are going to age out without ever being adopted.
I actually have opened the 2020 adoption statistics. 20,000 aged out in the fiscal year of 2020. 20,000 people.
Most of them most of them don't even have a high school diploma or a GED or a GED. 4% of them have college educations. Most of them are going to end up either on welfare or in prison, statistically speaking. So again, there's this insistence that these kids be born. Beyond that, nobody gives a crap.
Well, a lot of very poor states, and I'm not trying to bash on the Republican Party, statistically, a lot of the states that require the most federal aid and have the most issues with education, poverty, Republican southern states.
Yes.
And if they can get more people into the world that are not going to be able to live a good life, get informed, then that's more voters in that demographic. A lot of the time, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of like Democratic decisions, but a lot of the time, people kind of at least become more central or sometimes to the left when they get a strong education. And that's at least just the left and how the right and left are defined nowadays, because back in the day, it was a little more realistic. If we want to talk about making America great again, if we're going back, like if people say making America great again, like if this is a part of it, then they don't have the proper historical understanding of where America's been, because this is like outlawing abortion stuff. This isn't going back to what things used to be. This is like taking advantage of a current situation and people's lack of understanding of how the United States used to run and why decisions were made back in the day. And on that note, a big issue that I have is just people being like, people loved Republicans when they freed the slaves, and now they hate Republicans for doing stuff. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, well, Abraham Lincoln wasn't the kind of Republican that you are today. It's like they were a lot more
change. Yes.
They were far to the left. Like early Republicans back then, a lot of Republicans were like small government, not a lot of government spending. That was the concept. It wasn't like Christian beliefs getting forced down everybody's throats. It was like a very understood, I would argue, is a lot more so economic as opposed to civil liberties, as it is as it's become. But that I could ramble on a lot, but I wanted to get into a couple of these adoption statistics. So yeah, in 2020, and this is also reminding you, while people could get abortions, there were over 20,000 youths who aged out of foster care without a permanent family at the end of fiscal year 2020. That's a 24% decrease in private. There was a 24% decrease in private domestic adoptions from 2019 to 2020. A 93% decline in intercountry adoptions since peaking in 2004. There's been an increase of 32 months in the average time children have to wait for adoption in the foster care system. So, at the end, the amount of children waiting to be adopted at the end of 2020 was 117,470. And this is all when people can get abortions. So when anybody argues like you can put a child up for abortion, put a child up for adoption, that's not necessarily a good option, because it's almost just like putting them into like brushing them under the rug so you don't have to see them anymore, but you still get your beliefs satisfied, which just irritates me. Like I'm someone who thinks that people should mind their own business a lot of the time. Like I'm not like I'm the kind of person who's like, hey, I've got information that could help you in your decision making, but I'm not going to like be like, hey, make this decision. Which is why I think that this is just complete and utter bullshit. Like everyone always talks about the government being tyrannical, and then this happens and those same people are just silent, being like, yay, this is a win for states' rights. I'm just like, yeah, but states' rights were never like the whole Civil War was supposed to be about states' rights, apparently, but that was because of a state's right to own
It's
somebody.
right. It was specific. I mean, when people say it was about states' rights, the right that they were all discussing was slavery. They wanted to own human beings, and everybody was like, that's a terrible idea. But when these guys get a thought in their head, there's no going back. I mean, states' rights are fine. The problem is what happens in intrastate situations. What happens if I'm married in Connecticut and I go to Texas and now I'm not? That's the problem, and that's why things need to be codified. Again, this isn't about anyone's religious beliefs. You don't get to decide this stuff based on what your religion tells you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nonsensical at this point that we're still playing along with that game, because there's real world consequences here. Again, at the end of the day, the state doesn't have any standing in these cases to get involved in people's personal lives. The Supreme Court ruled a fetus is not a person and therefore has no rights. So you're not saving the life. Again, understand many of these pregnancies would have never finished anyway. So again, this comes down to the sanctity of life and God put the baby in the belly. No, that's not how science works. I mean, I'm all for keeping these things to the first trimester, and it gets iffy into the second and absolutely not in the third. As you said, viability matters, and it always has when it came to abortion. No one's aborting a baby unless the mother's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way you're getting one pretty much after 6 months. Now, here's a messed up thing, and this is going to be a big problem in this country, and I hope a lot of these Republicans get to deal with it. When a baby dies in utero, any ejection of that baby before 37 weeks is considered an abortion in Texas. So, generally speaking, Robbie, they send the mom home with the baby dead inside until she can pass it on her own. Now, people are like, that's messed up. They should change. But they can't, because the law you just passed says you can't. So maybe she'll die from sepsis because she has to carry a dead fetus home inside of her. This isn't about your God. Jesus did not know what America was. That idea that Jesus is our savior, are you serious? He did not know where America was, didn't know it existed.
He was Jewish.
Didn't even know germ theory, as a matter of fact. Told the apostles they shouldn't wash up and clean their hands before dinner. Mm-hmm. Genius. Ancient myths don't decide today's laws. And again, dude, 60 years ago, the technology on an abortion, it was more dangerous. Today, it's a very safe procedure. Again, the state should have no interest in this at all.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, 64,000 people had their rights terminated as a parent last year, either willingly or by force. So again, you have to have the baby, whether you want to pay it child support or educate it or do anything to it, nobody gives a shit. That's the great irony here. Have the baby.
Yep, have the baby so we can stop caring about it.
Yes. We're going to vote against Head Start programs. We're going to vote against welfare programs, education. I mean, Republicans hate education. Have the baby, but don't teach it anything.
Yeah, it's
we have a baby formula shortage. Now's the time you want more babies born? Are you people serious?
And in Texas, you got to boil your water, and you can't turn your AC on because the infrastructure for the electricity isn't there. But let's load up more kids. It irritates me to no end. because there's, like we're saying, there's a bunch of other issues that we need to address. And this one is just not something that it wasn't broke. We didn't need to fix it. People that had a problem with it were the people that were having a problem with other people's lives. I said this I wrote this on social media, but it's the result of people not understanding emotional intelligence and not learning to mind their own business. And that's one of the most irritating things for me, is that people not minding their own, like, leads to this situation, which complicates things immensely to state courts, state situations. Any ounce of context that's ever considered is going to blow this thing up. Not like maybe not at the Supreme Court level, but it's going to blow up as far as people being like, wait, is this a situation where this takes place, or am I exempt in this situation? Like, there's so many things that they need to dive into that they didn't need to. They essentially introduced a problem that they now need to search for a solution for, and they can't even find solutions for the problems that they're already dealing with. And on this topic, I know it's probably a little bit different, and we can talk a little bit more about this on our next podcast. But I was thinking about the decision to take somebody off life support, and I know a pregnancy is a lot different than somebody being on life support, but if somebody can make the decision for their own family member to be taken off life support in a certain circumstance, why can't they do it when say a mother is the life support system for a child? Like, why can they make a decision later in life, but not when they're legitimately attached to the person that they have to make that decision for? And there's probably a lot of different rights issues and stuff, but
the answer will be very religious in nature.
Yeah.
That's what you would generally get on that. And again, that should have zero bearing on legal court cases in America.
Yep. Well, we've got plenty more to talk about on this, and I'd love to continue the conversation next week. But you got anything else to say before we wrap up here?
No, I just, for me, it's about being consistent and about your logic applying to all fields. And that's something that conservatives mightily struggle with at this point, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's embarrassing and unfortunately extremely revealing as far as our current circumstance, as far as systems that need to be updated, revisited, now that we're in a modern era where things are different and things are far more advanced than they were at the time of certain things being decided on. So, Joe, we'll definitely talk more about this, do a lot more research on every topic that we've talked about. We'll be posting a lot more stuff on our social media, just so we can get that going. We've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, if you want to watch our videos of our podcasts or just listening to them on YouTube. All of our usernames are at Following Flames across the board, or just Following Flames. And we'd love to have you follow us there and be a part of the conversation a little bit more. But until that happens, it's been a pleasure. Joe, thanks for being here again. Love getting heated over these conversation topics. We got a lot of them now. Some of the things we talk about during the week, we just can never get to because the news cycle is stronger than ever right now. So we'll keep the conversation going and be back next week. And once again, thanks everybody for joining us today. And that's it. I'm Robbie McCluskey, Joe Aguirre with me, and we'll see you again next week, everybody. Thank you very much.